So kia ora everyone, and welcome to the New Zealand High Commission. My name is Jocelyn Tong Palmer and I'm a New Zealand Chamber board member for those who don't know me. I'm delighted to open tonight's event brought to you by Erskine Owen and welcome our speaker Alan Henderson. Alan is the co-founder and director of Erskine Owen, and this is a New Zealand-based wealth management and property investment firm. Alan has over 15 years experience in property funds and is also a chartered accountant and authorised financial advisor. So we're super lucky to be able to pick Alan's brain tonight on the topic of insights into the property implications of the New Zealand government's coalition agreement, and also answer his questions. So as we're going along, please put up your hand, ask your questions, and Alan's happy to take them on the go. Before I hand over to Alan, I just want to do a few housekeeping matters. So if you need the bathroom, it is outside in the middle of the building. So just go out and turn left and there'll be someone there hopefully to let you back in. If not, phone a friend. So we'll also be sticking around after the session for some drinks and nibbles and networking. So without further ado, please warmly welcome Alan.
Thanks, Thank you. So I was just commenting to some people beforehand that I didn't get rung up by the Singaporean government to come in for my 6 shows, and I'm not paid by the government to be here, so I'm working up to that, and hopefully I'll build my following. But so we said goodbye to our eldest child back in February, who took off to Sydney University. Our son Ethan, 18 years old, and we wished him farewell and great expectations of him. And we're sure he'll go well. Sent him off with an emergency credit card for emergencies only. And just so happens that he has had 2 emergencies in the first 2 weeks of being at university. So I rang him up and I said, "Son, are you okay? And I'm really concerned about you." And he said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I can see that you've had 2 emergencies. One cost you $27 at the Marlborough pub, and the other one cost you $50 at the Salisbury bar." And he thought that was really funny. Until, of course, I said that I wouldn't be paying any university fees until he paid me back, which he did. And so it's the principle of the matter. He thought I was a dick. But there you have it. So, look, we expect he'll go well. Then my wife, Lisa, had great expectations of him communicating regularly. Sort of 3 or 4 times a week would be great. Just a few updates, just sharing and caring about how he's going, any girls that he's meeting, how he's feeling, any stresses in his life, and unfortunately that hasn't worked to plan, so he hasn't rung at all, and we've been trying to contact him and he's got into roans, he hasn't got any time, and so there's been a fair bit of conflict, there's been a fair bit of tension, oddly enough not between Lisa and my son Ethan, more between Lisa and myself, because it's my fault that he's not communicating, because apparently I haven't modelled the right behaviour, and apparently when I've gone away on trips, I don't communicate very well, and which is actually quite true. So I do get caught up and forget to ring back and kind of have conversations. So I'm trying to improve on that. So, and then of course I've rung my son and explained to him that I expect him to up his game, which again, he just thinks it's a good laugh that I'm copping it and he's not. And so what on earth has that got to do with the property market? So what fascinates me about that is that you have these expectations of how life is going to work, and often it's our expectations that dictates how we feel as a result of the outcome. And if our expectations are not, I guess, we're expecting something to work out a certain way and it doesn't, we can get hacked off and it doesn't work. And I think there's some corollary there, or there's kind of an interesting analogy with the property market, in that our expectations of what's going to happen with the property market can impact the decisions that we make and how we feel about the property market. So how do we actually develop good expectations and that can help us guide good thinking and good decision making? And that's what tonight is really about, is trying to dig behind what's going on in the property market. So, you get behind our son and he's up there, he's having a whale of a time, just into his rowing straight away. That's partly why he went to Sydney, and he's got into the team, and he is just so busy and he's loving it, which is actually a really healthy thing. And along the way, we're going to expect there to be some bumps in the road. He's going to have a great time there, he's a good kid and he'll come out with a good job, and along the way there'll be some bumps and it won't all go to plan. In the same way, if we get a really good understanding of what the property market does and what the drivers are, I think that helps us to kind of appreciate what might be happening and not get worked up when things kind of unexpectedly happen. So let's jump into it. Definitely questions along the way. Don't be afraid to jump in, challenge, ask questions. So the challenges, so 3 parts to it. The challenges that I think the property market in the country is facing, what the government, what this coalition is doing, some of the things that they're doing, and then the impact of those changes. Challenges, so what we're going to cover off here is cost of living, yep, painful. Housing, we really do have a big problem in housing. Come on in. Social, it's not Singapore. I was talking about it with a couple of people. We have a massive welfare state in New Zealand, which doesn't really exist here, and the contrast is big. You know, people depend on the government. A lot of people depend on the government back in New Zealand, and that has an impact. Again, the government in New Zealand is very different to here, and they've got debt problems in New Zealand. The New Zealand government has got big debt problems, as you're probably aware, and property finance, well, good luck getting it at the moment. It's a lot more challenging, and we'll talk about the impact of that. So housing, not enough of it, and demand is lifting. That's kind of the story. It's pretty simple, but let's delve behind that because that's obvious. So the way we measure buying demand, or one of the ways that we measure that, is house sales volumes. So house sales volumes, interesting, but it's not really, it doesn't tell us that much. But what we do is we overlay with this the net migration. So black line's net migration against the right-hand axis. And what you can see is there's actually quite a close correlation between net migration and house sales volumes. So you can see back in the 90s, in the noughties or the noughts, net migration takes off, so the house sales volumes comes back. So there is kind of a correlation there. And but that's up to September 18, and then we come to now, and the trend is, it's bucking the trend. So something's going wonky. So you can see that net migration has taken off. 130,000 people in the 12 months to January of this year. So unprecedented. 70,000 was the biggest number of people we had in before COVID. So it's gone from 70,000 to 130,000. And you could argue, well, that's just people catching up, but not really, because although there's been an influx in people coming in, there's been an influx in people exiting as well. And that number hasn't dropped below 100,000. So it continues to lift. So we're getting this massive increase in population, but we're not seeing the corresponding lift in supply. So that's weird. Why is that? Here's consents. Consents have dropped off. So we're not having the lift. And why have consents dropped off? Because developers can't sell properties. Why can't developers sell properties? Because people can't get finance. Why can't people get finance? Because banks won't lend to them because they don't meet the servicing criteria. Why don't they meet the servicing criteria? Because banks are using a hurdle rate of 9% in serviceability calculations, and that rules out a lot of investors. It doesn't work. They may be able to afford it based on their own calculations, but the banks won't lend to them. So, and why have inflation, interest rates gone up? Well, we know that's because the OCR's gone up, and the OCR's gone up because inflation's gone up. So it's all interlinked. So that's why we've got a problem. But what's really interesting is that rental stock in New Zealand is predominantly owned by private landlords. The blue portion of those bars, private landlords. So actually, in New Zealand, rental stock, the country relies on private landlords to own rental stock and come into the market. So if private landlords can't buy, it means that we are not going to expand our housing stock, which means we've got a big problem. And the government doesn't step in like they do here. If more supply is required in Singapore, the government just builds it. And they can do that. And it's a lot easier, but it's way more political in New Zealand. So, and why do I show that? Because, well, there's a few things around housing. It's not just the higher interest rates. So the Labour government came in and almost made private landlords feel like demonic people. And that's kind of extreme, but it just, for some people, I'm not saying I felt that way, but we kind of got that messaging from people. Why? Because you go to the tenancy tribunal to evict your tenant who's got 10 grand of outstanding rent, and the tribunal will say, sorry, I'm not evicting them, because you're just going to have to get them to pay it off. And you're kind of going, well, hang on a minute, how does that work? The problem with that, why are they doing that? Well, we manage hundreds of residential properties. You get to know the adjudicators, and the sort of off the record comments as well. We've been told not to evict people because there's nowhere for them to go, because we've run out of emergency housing, and so the government is welcome. The government is renting Airbnb properties just to put people up. There is such a massive lack of housing in New Zealand. So massive supply problem. So what it does is it disincentivizes some people from owning, because they're going, this is too hard. I can't evict my tenants when they won't pay. Landlords in general, 99% of private landlords are good people that want to do good by their tenants, look after them, but they're made to feel like they're the enemy, where 99% of the time they're not. And also you've got other rules like the extended way where you can evict a tenant, or eviction's a strong word, but you might want to give a tenant notice, and they made that a whole lot harder. So disincentivizing the private landlord. But that's a problem. You don't want to disincentivize. You can't afford in New Zealand to disincentivize the private landlord for too long. Excuse me. Cost of living. Well, we know that inflation's gone up. So there's the CPI, but it's coming back down. So cost of living is a prohibitor to investing, because if you're spending more on consumer goods, then you've got less money to afford to hold property. It's coming back down. So Christmas 22, we said the back of inflation, the inflation problem had been broken, and that it would just be played out during 2023, and we think that's pretty much what's happened. So I think we got that one right. And so but it's not back below 3%. So the Reserve Bank's not going to start pulling back interest rates or pulling back the OCR until they see that inflation is back, or the genie's back in the bottle. But for that to happen, the blue line is wage growth, and so that's a big component of inflation, and it hasn't yet started coming back down. So our view is that really needs to come back down before we see inflation properly back in its hole. And that has just started coming off, and we've just started to see people getting a bit concerned about job security, because there's a bunch of redundancies and there's a bit of pain starting to happen. So I think it is well and truly on its way back down. Reserve Bank Australia just held interest rates steady today, and their messaging is less harsh. So analysts are now picking Aussie rates to come back down, start coming down at the back end of this year. And my personal view, it's not necessarily the company view, is that we'll start to see rates, OCR, coming back down. We've already seen banks starting to cut interest rates, probably because they've got good margins and they can afford to, and the price wars are starting to happen. Social, well, you probably read about it. Ram rates, truancy, health problems. So what would happen in Singapore if you had a lot of truancy? It's just not going to happen, is it? I hate to think. I don't know what would happen. It probably doesn't happen. Pardon?
Oh, sorry, spit the truth.
Sorry. What am I want to say about social problems? Sorry. Back up. So it's a challenge. So New Zealand does have social challenges, and it's hard to fix them because we've got this welfare dependency. So in Singapore, correct me if I'm wrong, but people work hard until they're 80, and then the family looks after them. In New Zealand, no?
They work hard till they're 90 and they die.
Yeah, fair enough. In New Zealand, they don't work hard, and then they die at about 70, which is actually sad truth. But in a lot of places, that does happen. It's sad, you know. And so we've got this dependency in New Zealand from a lot of people, rightly or wrongly. We've said to people, it's okay to rely on the government, and we've got generations now, third generation children, that have never seen a parent or grandparent go to work. And so the idea of working is foreign to them. and you don't have that. So you've got that challenge, and the challenge of governments fixing that is they're only on a 3-year term. So if they push too hard on policies, they don't want to do that because it risks getting ejected from government. So that's a challenge, and does it mean that, I guess the question around that is that does it mean that it destroys the property market? But let's look at that later. So Crown debt, pre-COVID 6 billion, now it's 70 billion. Some people say it's 100 billion because I think the Labor government said, oh no, but it's not 100 million because you've got ACC. So in New Zealand, you've got ACC, accident compensation, so they've got about 20 billion under management or something. So I think they're netting that off. So it's a bit of a trick. So it's probably more like 100 billion. So no worries, just pay it off over the next 100 years. Not a problem. This government's come in. I was at dinner with one of the Paul Goldsmith, who was going to be the finance minister, but then he's not. But I said to him, "What was it like opening the books?" And he said, "Yeah, it was sobering, and like it's a big problem, and they've got big challenges ahead of them, but they knew that they had that." So there's challenges for sure. And then finance, we've talked about the 2-year rate and where that's at. And what did I want to say about that? Yeah, just that the interest rate needs to come back down to be more affordable for things to loosen up. So we've got to see those interest rates coming back down, not so that people will invest, so that people can afford to, but just so people can get access to finance. Any questions on any of that? Makes sense?
Stupid question. The net migration, it's the difference between incoming and outgoing.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
correct.
Yeah.
So it doesn't include the natural population growth, but it's just your net. Yeah, so massive exodus of the problem. One of the problems, they haven't analysed it deeply, is our productivity. And so New Zealand's productivity, which is GDP per hour worked, is quite low now compared to the OECD. And so we've got a real productivity issue in New Zealand, and that's probably partly because of who's coming into the country. So a lot of those 130,000 people are probably temporary workers and fruit pickers that we needed in the country because we're deeply dependent on agriculture in New Zealand. So that's probably that mix, whereas we don't have a massive industry in New Zealand for software or technology. We haven't done that. So that's the problem. So we've got this big demand for housing that's growing and growing and growing, but our problem is how do we, this GDP issue. And it's not, I don't think it's easily fixed, but yeah. So what is the government doing about it? What's this government? So the tax changes. So just actually before I do that, remember, we may not know that the Labor government came in and said, okay, no deductibility of interest on rental properties. So we're taking that away, and that hurt. And ACT said, no, we're bringing it completely back in. And the plan was 60% of interest would be deductible in this financial year, then 80% next year and 100% the year after. The government's come in, opened the books and went, oops, yeah, there's a bit more to pay here than we thought. And so they've said no deductibility this year. Well, people probably weren't really, they've already basically know that they've got it, so no big deal. But they're continuing with the 80% the next financial year and then 100% the year after. So good news, it's back. And so that's now starting to, I guess, remove a little bit of the disincentive that the Labor government brought in. The Bright Line test, coming back to 2 years. So the Bright Line test, for those who don't know, was that if you sold, the Labor government took it from 2 to 5 to 10 years. So if you sell within 10 years, any gains would be taxed at your marginal tax rate. So it's not a pure capital gains tax, but I call it a backdoor capital gains tax, because a pure capital gains tax, there would be a set tax rate to pay on your gain, but you're getting taxed at your marginal tax rate. So this is yet to be passed through legislation. So the deductibility of the interest has just happened. The Bright Line test, I think, is still coming through, but it'll happen on the 1st of July.
What about the interest deductibility on new builds? Builds in the last couple of years?
Yeah, so that's true. So the exception to the interest deductibility rule was that you could deduct it on new builds.
What was the period?
For until so I think it was a 10-year rule. I think
That's not going to come into the picture then.
it doesn't matter, yeah, because you had that deductibility anyway.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, bright line test back to 2 years, so that's good. So again, starting to remove some of that disincentive for private landlords, and so less of an issue, you know, and unless you're a speculator, who's going to not hold it for 2 years? Somebody told me today that a lot of Singaporeans trade properties and buy off the plans and flick them. Not so common in New Zealand. RMA, Resource Management Act, everybody know what that is? So it's a pain in the ass. It makes it so hard to get consents through. It takes forever. You know, I mean, there's some good things about it. We want to protect the environment for sure, but it's really onerous. And the Labor government had a plan to amend it because even they agreed it was too laborious. But David Seymour from ACT Party wants to repeal it completely. Good luck, because that'll just take forever. He won't get that done in 3 years. But they're talking about making amendments. It's whether or not it actually you know, a big part of it, we'll come back to that. So tenancy, we've talked about this. So now you can evict a tenant without providing any explanation. It's called an, and so that is back. So you can just give 90 days, and that's where it used to be. The other notice periods are back to where they were. So landlords 42 days if you want to sell it. So that's kind of providing some, okay, so we've got some flexibility there. National government's talking about using KiwiSaver to be able to use for bonds on rental properties. So you always have to take it. We don't have to take a bond, but we do. You know, anybody in the right mind does, and then you pay it to the ministry. It has to be paid to the ministry. So it's just more efficient. I guess it makes it easier for people in the lower socio-economic kind of brackets. So that's probably a good thing. What is staying is, also what's important is fixed term tenancies don't automatically roll over to a periodic, which what that means is, you know, because if you have a fixed term tenancy for a year and you can't renegotiate, it becomes periodic, and then you're back into this notice period. So you don't want that. You want to be able to refix your tenancy period. So that's a good thing. What's not going is you can only increase rent every 12 months, and healthy homes is staying. And we think that's fair enough. That's good. You know, I think tenants need to have some kind of certainty around rent. And again, the healthy homes thing was we lost a lot of managements through people selling through healthy homes that had enough. They sort of made their money and didn't want to go through the upgrade exercise. That's largely come to an end. And I think that's fair enough. I mean, New Zealand, especially in the North Island, has a lot of dampness, and so that's fair enough. State housing is interesting. So the Labor government wanted to own everything. That's the Labor government for you. Whereas the coalition government is agnostic about whether they own or rent stuff. And why that's important is because with having the private landlords being able to own state leased property, is it brings in potentially bigger corporates who go, well, okay, now I'm prepared to build a big apartment block and tenant it because I can get a 20-year lease from the government, and I'm prepared to do that. And I think New Zealand, it's not Singapore, so it probably needs that. So I think that's probably a good thing, and we should start to see, potentially we could see a whole lot more solutions coming to market quicker. Because we went to Kāinga Ora, that's the name of Housing New Zealand now, and said, well, we'll do stuff because we do property syndications, property funds, and we said we'd be interested in doing stuff, but they won't. They want to own it, so it didn't work. We can't do a syndication on something we can't own. So, you know, we'd be interested in doing that. And zoning, so medium density residential standards. I don't know if you heard about that, but that got passed through. It was weirdly a Judith Collins. Maybe it's not weird, but I thought it was weird. She agreed to cooperate with Labor to bring that in, where high density everywhere around the country, and you can build anywhere high density. So, you know, Remuera, you could have a high-rise building going up next door to you. So that's getting repealed. So it'll be up to councils they're not taking it, so repeal's not the right word, but they're giving councils the option of whether or not they do that. And they're also, this is a David Seymour play, give or share GST from house sales with councils. Whether or not, that's not yet, those items are not yet law.
Excuse me. If you let the councils decide whether they want high density or medium density, surely they'll go for high density because then they make more money.
Yeah, yes and no. We've got a syndicated piece of land in Queenstown, bought it in 2018 for, so 5 hectares, bought it because we said it would one day, it's lifestyle rural, and we said one day it'll become, bought it 2018, it'll become residential, and that's happening. So it's actually a council-led initiative. Bought it for 5 million, now it's worth north of 20 million. That's why you should invest through us, because think about those gains. And so we've just spent 300,000, well, syndicate has spent 300,000 being part of that process to say, because the council wanted to make it high density. The whole thing had to be high density, and we said, you're nuts, because if you do that, you're going to shut out developers. There's only a certain number of developers who can build high density. So if you do that, you shut out all the developers that can only build medium density, which is 3 stories high. And they've listened, and therefore they've brought it back. So
They're obviously smart councillors that listen. But maybe not all the councillors are so smart.
yeah, and but what's really interesting, you have the NIMBYs, not in my backyard, which is everywhere around the world, and that's like in San Francisco, in San Fran, that's a major thing. So they talk about, high density, but then all the councillors say, well, we're not having it happening in our backyard, and so they've got a messed up system there. So in theory, it could happen, but you've got the RMA as well. So it has to happen, but will it happen? Yeah. But councils aren't necessarily a fan of it. Hello.
Hi. Excuse me, can you elaborate a little bit more on the GST point? Because I thought most residential house sales don't attract GST.
Correct. So home sales don't, but when developers are selling them, they have to charge GST. So to enter the GST regime, so as a property investor, so you're investing for the purpose of, you're buying property for purposes of investment, it's zero rated for GST purposes. So there is no GST. You don't claim GST when you buy, and you don't have to pay or remit GST when you sell. But as soon as you become a property developer, and how do you become a property developer? Well, it's largely intent, and that's, but if you undertake works of more than a minor nature, so there's a certain number of tests you enter, and you become a developer, and then your profits are on revenue account, not on capital account, and therefore you also naturally have to pay GST. But to your point, it will only be applied to new builds from developers. So yeah, correct. But not if you're an investor just selling your property, your investment property. Okay, outside of property, what's going on? So a lot of talk about public-private partnerships. I think it probably has to happen because the state hasn't got the money. They've spent it all during COVID. No money left. They're talking about things like a 4-lane highway. This government, interestingly, Simeon Brown, the minister, is really, really pro-roads. I don't particularly understand that. Look at how, the Singapore government here, sure, they've got the population, and they just went and built the underground, and it's paid off. We should get, Auckland should get its first section of the underground rails sometime this century. It'll finally happen, and at just a smidgen over budget. So what else? Savings. They're trying to get all the state departments to come up with savings, and that's a challenge. So some of them saying that, we're doing it by not hiring any more people, so our budget will be below budget because we're not going to hire anybody. So being a bit sneaky. Education, starting to try and bring in reforms there to lift education. We're talking to somebody beforehand about how, it's sad about how the standard of education has slipped. Crime, tougher on gangs, they're going after that. So the government is definitely cracking down, and welfare, more accountability. So they're bringing that in. Just in the press today, I think, Luxon stood up and said, Kāinga Ora tenants that are trouble, they're going to get kicked out. And he's getting huge flack from the other side of the political spectrum for doing that, or even talking about it, and saying, because they're saying, what about the poor children of those families that are going to be homeless as a result of doing that? Yeah, that's a problem. There's no easy solution, because you don't want to see children disaffected, but what do? That's why I'm not going to run for Prime Minister, because it's hard. So, what is the impact? Okay, so going to take you on a little. It's going to be interesting. I'm going to do a little. It's going to be interesting. It's going to a little bit of a history lesson, lest we forget. I used to hate history, but now I listen to these podcasts on history, and I must be getting old because I quite enjoy them. Demand and supply imbalance. I think the floodgates could be opening soon, and anything can happen. And this is kind of the expectation side of it. So lest we forget, look at this graph. Oh my goodness. Whew. Check this out. That's what it is, isn't it? Like it's a Mount Everest. It's scary. You know, look, it's actually a really similar peak. Like, you know, dangerous. You could fall off. Think about the damage that people think about the headaches that people have got. But is that really true? So is that as extreme as what it looks? Look at this thing here. Look at this little benign little climb. It looks irrelevant, doesn't it? So if we click through now, here's that 92 to 97. So 92 to about 97, that's this here. And it's all relative, isn't it? So you go back to there and stand back in 1992 and look up, and it looks actually quite dramatic. But it doesn't look dramatic from where we are today because it's all relative, because the dollars are skewed up. We're not looking at percentage gains. What this graph doesn't show us, the stratified median house price for the country, doesn't show us the relative gains. So now we come back to this and it looks all a little bit benign. And here we have, oh, but look at this. Look at this dramatic jump.
What were the interest rates in 92?
I'm going to come to that. What were the interest rates in 92? So I'm going to piss these guys off because I said I would repeat the question instead of giving them the mic. So, sorry guys. What's that? No, back in 92? No, but I will show you. We'll come to it. So here we are through this period. So I had an accounting practice during this period here, and mortgage brokers would send me clients because I liked investment property and I showed them how it worked. I'd draw graphs and say, buy here, hold, just hold. You know, hold for a long time. You don't need to go and buy some flash Harry scheme. Just buy a good, 3-bedroom state house on a full site. You'll make lots of money. And it was really simple. And then we had analysts, like I don't even know if he's around anymore, Bernard Hickey, saying the prices are going to drop 30%. And we said, no, it's not going to happen, is it really? Like, it's not going to keep going forever, but is it really going to come off 30%? Believe it's going to stop, something will happen and it'll stop. So what happened is, let's have a look. Wow, massive drop. The GFC, sorry, I'm in your way. So GFC, look at that drop. World was ending. The world was ending. And people said that life was going to change and that business as we knew it, commerce as we knew it. You kind of forget, but back at that time, we sold the accounting practice beginning of 2006, did some consulting, and then said, Lisa, I've got this amazing idea. We're going to be retired in 2 years. We're going to start a buyer agency and help all these people buy. And we set that up in April 2007, bought a couple more properties, and then all hell broke loose. So there we were, trying to peddle our service to people. People like friends were sort of laughing, commiserating with me, going, man, you're stupid, Alan, for embarking on that. And we're renovating a home at the time, second child due, and there were a few interesting conversations over the dinner table. That crazy idea I had. And so it's just trying to paint the picture of how, what's my point, is then you go, okay, and here we are. So here we are back at now this jump, and that's the decrease. So all of a sudden that drop looks a lot more benign when you look at it from where we are today. I think you're probably starting to get the picture. So here we are, we've got this drop. Okay, today it looks dramatic. but is it really that dramatic? Now, the last part of the history lesson, I hope I haven't lost anybody, is that I just want to go through and kind of remind you of some of the things that happened. So I'm going to stand over here so you can see, because I think I'm in your way. Okay, so post-GFC, inflation didn't fire or take off as expected, and then interest rate cuts started. So I will come back to your question, but not yet. And then more cuts. There was even talk about negative interest rates and more cuts, and were we going to get to a negative interest rate territory? Like, that was back in the day where the Reserve Bank, I did my speech, and then the Reserve Bank economist got up and said, we will never see interest rates go beyond 5% again in our lifetime. And he had a graph to prove it, which said back in Egyptian times, interest rates, believe it or not, he found interest rates back from Egyptian times. I don't know how you do that, but he's still the economist of Kiwi Bank. And it was kind of like, because he looked at it and said population, with the only time you had interest rate spikes were during massive population booms. You know, I remember delivering when I got my $400 and invested in Merrick Finance at 20%. But we had more cuts and they were going down. But then we had COVID and we had the lockdown, and we thought, gosh, what's going to happen? And there's the drop. So here's the drop here. Lockdown, prices drop. And it was just like ghost town. So I'm sitting at home trying to do deals with real estate agents, and everybody's freaking out. There's just no point. Like, nobody wanted to talk to me. Nobody wanted to, because nobody knew what was going to happen. It was like this great unknown. And we couldn't even talk to people about deals because nobody knew what was going to happen. And then what happened was the RBNZ eased the LVR restrictions to protect the economy. And they said, we learnt our lesson during the GFC. We've got to sort of ease monetary, quantitative easing and all of that. And so they did that, and then house prices took off. So it was largely the easing of the LVR restrictions that made the house prices take off. And then we had the COVID craziness. And then Grant Robertson went to Adrian Orr, said, Adrian, can you just stop this LVR easing because it's just doing crazy things with house prices? He said, no, bugger off, because I don't want to repeat history. So Grant Robertson said, okay, then I'll remove remove the deductibility of interest. LVR restrictions come back because inflation starts coming on. OCR rate hikes. CCCFA, ask me later what that is. Sales volumes drop dramatically. Government comes in, bit of positivity. Oh, but job security, and it's just come off. Now, what's my whole point about this is that we live in the present, going, oh my goodness, and we think, oh, it's going to dramatically change what happens. But actually, what's the point is that split ends are wrong. History does repeat. It absolutely does repeat. And what happens? Okay, we get this climb, we get a climb, and then we get another climb. So it's really just saying that, you know, just relax. It's all going to start happening again. Okay, demand versus supply. So this is a dam, and there is no water here, or very little water here, but there is a lot of water. Here's all the water. And it's only that it's been held back. So lots and lots of water, but it's just been held back. Property market's no different. We've got this massive demand. So 130,000 people, where are they all going? Well, you know, what do we do? If we keep going at that trajectory, we are going to have a massive housing crisis, and it may be too late anyway. Because you saw the graph on dwellings, and what's holding it back? The cost of living. Even if you can get a loan, a lot of people are sort of tentative. Interest rate make it hard to get a loan, make it unaffordable and hard to get a loan, and now we've got job security. People are nervous. So that is what is stopping demand expressing itself in a buying format. It's been expressed in terms of renting, and that's why rental prices are starting to go up quite dramatically. We're seeing that in our own business. It is not hard for us. We have a whiteboard of all the vacancies, and it's like we don't have to look at it because they're gone in 60 seconds. But what needs to change for that? What needs to happen for those for the floodgates to open? Well, we need the CPI to come back down. That's happening, and my firm belief is the again, the back of it has been broken, and it's just a matter of time. So it's coming back, and then we have the OCR that will then come down. It's got to happen. I don't know if it's going to be this year. I personally think it will be, but it's got to happen sooner rather than later, and then the banks will get easier. A lot of what drives the serviceability calculations are not just the interest rates, because the banks, it's up to the banks where they set the hurdle rate. But what a lot drives it is the credit departments. And so in times like this, the credit departments freak out. They go, oh my goodness, I'm going to have all these defaulting loans if we lend now, and people won't be able to afford it. And so they get conservative, but once they have confidence about what's happening, then the credit teams will go, oh, actually, yeah, we're feeling good about life, and you can drop your hurdle rate to 7%. And all of a sudden, that can change things. So it can change on a dime. Job security, sorry, I'll go back. That I don't think that'll come back till maybe later in the year. Am I okay for time? Am I all right for time? So job security might, but I don't think we need that. If we have all these other three things in favour, then I think the floodgates will open and demand will flow. But the problem is that it's all very well for the floodgates to open. They've all of a sudden got people out there trying to buy property, right? So, okay, it's all coming back, but what are they going to buy? Because, these are consents, and you can't live in a consent. So they're not built houses. So first of all, you need people to be able to buy, and then they go and transact on a property and put their deposit down. And then, okay, so there's some residual stock where there are building consents that are ready to go, great. But then what about the developers that have kind of hibernated? They've got to gear up again, go and get their consents. And so there is this lag of, say, 24 months. And so you've got all this demand that's screaming out for property. And so what happens when demand exceeds supply? It's just, it will happen again. So that's really to say that I think whether it's this year or early next, when you get all those factors working, you'll see prices starting to rocket again, and it will all start again. So I've purposely said that we've got these social problems, but New Zealand is an attractive place for a lot of people to live. And so we've got a big, I think, a widening gap between the rich and the poor, but it doesn't mean that the New Zealand property market is going to suffer as a result of the welfare problems, because we've seen that it's really resilient. All these things going on, but until they fix the supply problem, we are always going to have this demand, supply imbalance. And so I don't think it's necessarily great that we've got a huge supply problem, but it's just a reality. And so because you've got the RMA, you've got the governments that are scared of doing things because they'll get kicked out of government, so they can't easily fix supply. So that means demand will exceed supply at some point in terms of express demand, and property prices will go nuts again. I have got no doubt. This is my fourth rodeo, I think, of doing this. I used to have brown hair when I first started doing these, and I just stood in London in 2011 and said, by 2022, you won't be able to build any more standalone housing in Auckland. And people looked at me like I was weird. Because in 2011, that was still New Zealand with the quarter acre section in Auckland, and that's what people have grown up with. And in that period, it's changed. So in 10 years, that has actually happened. That wasn't our forecast. It was a Housing New Zealand, not a housing, a Crown Institute, sorry, a state body that forecast that, and we were just the messenger. But people thought we were nuts, saying that that's what's going to happen, and it's happened. So property prices will go nuts, and and then the other thing I'd say is anything can happen. So we're in this box and going, okay, we understand OCR, but who would have picked COVID? Who would have picked the spike in interest rates? Who would have picked the massive spike in values during a lockdown period? But it's happened, and so expectations, coming right back to expectations, expect the property prices to go nuts. So Michael Phelps was greatest Olympic swimmer probably ever. He used to spend some practices, some sessions practicing with broken goggles, and he used to visualise what could go wrong. So he would count. He knew exactly how many strokes it was to the end for a length, and in one Olympics his goggles filled up, and he could count to the end. So he just counted, couldn't see, but just counted, and won gold medal because he expected to win and he trained to win. But he also said, well, the unexpected can happen, and plan for it. And that's the same thing. It's going, anything can happen. So the anything could be that overnight we could see, for some weird reason, interest rates dropping dramatically. And I think that's sometimes what we forget. We get into this sort of here and now and forget about what has happened historically. I haven't answered your question, so I might just do that afterwards because I'd have to go and find it. But interest rates, so interest rates in 1992 were quite high, I think. But look, that's really scientific, isn't it?
Ellen, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any sense of how the developers are feeling sort of leading into this next stage? Like, I mean, a lot of them got burnt during that COVID period, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, so what's the question was, what's happened to developers, how are they feeling about this phase? A lot of them are just in survival mode. One of the Christchurch founded franchises in 2022, their total sales for 2022 was less than their worst month in 2021 or pre-COVID. So volumes just dropped dramatically. We've seen some of the franchise companies close. They're just in survival mode. We get calls from developers all the time saying, do you want to buy some land? And it just doesn't work. But it's really the bigger corporates that are going to survive and be ready to take advantage. So the bigger guys can buy up the land cheaply in preparation. And so there's a bit of that going on. There's some bigger players. And I think what we'll see is what's probably happening offshore. It's the bigger corporates that end up being able to survive. Fletcher Residential is a bit of an anomaly to that. If that answers that question. Any other questions on that?
So, what's your projection on sort of cost of materials, lack of tradespeople?
Costs. Yeah, sorry, I haven't talked about that. So, cool. What is the prediction on cost of material and tradespeople? So massive spike in pre-COVID. You just couldn't get a builder. They used to, waltz in and be really cavalier about giving you a quote, and then say, actually, we don't give quotes. We just, it's just time and materials and take it or leave it. That's flipped around. So they're now hunting for work, and the biggest. So what part of the cost of the driver of inflation of materials was the freight cost. So the cost to freight a container down from Asia to New Zealand pre-COVID was $6,000, and then it went up to about $18,000. And but that's come right back to pre-COVID levels. So a lot of the cost was driven by offshore costs, and that's starting to be tamed. So it's coming back. And I'm not saying prices are going to drop. It's just the rate of inflation. So it's still expensive. But it's slowing down, and there's more availability of labour to get things done. So you're not seeing this rampant increase of building costs. So my forecast is that it'll just become the new norm, and then we'll just get more normalised inflation. Somebody over here,
yeah.
Greg.
Question around when the floodgates open across Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Queenstown.
Yeah.
Do they open equally, or is there more availability in certain areas that will either dampen or speed up?
We haven't talked about that. So the question was, when the floodgates open, do they open equally in all areas, or do they change? So if we go back 10 years, we used to say don't ever buy in the provinces because it happens late. During a boom, the price growth happens late and it drops off pretty quickly. And so you can go to, but that started to change. So what we've seen with Auckland, because it becoming so much more congested and so much more unaffordable, that young professionals are now migrating out of Auckland to look at living elsewhere, like Christchurch, Taupo, Hawke's Bay, because you can get good jobs there. Christchurch, Queenstown for sure, Hamilton, not so much. Sorry, not so much New Plymouth, Taranaki. Mount Tauranga. So that's they've got massive population growth there. It's got a nice climate, and there are jobs there. So, but they're not all made equal. So we've got a graph that we show the different capital growth rates between Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. In Auckland, historically, their capital percentage growth rate, Auckland outstrips Christchurch, and Christchurch has outstripped Wellington. But what's changing is that part of that is that post-earthquake, Christchurch had a lot of excess supply of residential property, and that's all been soaked up. We like Christchurch because it's still quite affordable. You can still get a 3-bedroom weatherboard home on a full site for well under $1 million. You can't do that in Hamilton. And so, and that leads on to the question that you might want to ask is, well, where should I buy for maximum capital growth? And if I was going to invest in residential property, where would I buy? So our theory is that properties expand in concentric circles from their point of origin. So, you know, like Auckland City used to be the waterfront down in Quay Street, and that was it. And it just slowly expands out from there. And so if you think about it like a tiered pyramid or a tiered wedding cake, it overflows. And so we chase where most demand is going to be. So where is most demand? The biggest pool of buyers are first home buyers. And so what happens is they grow up in, say, Remuera, and I'm going to buy a home in Remuera. Oh, no, I'm not, because I can't afford it. And so they go out to the next suburb, and they go, oh, gosh, I've got to go and live in Mount Wellington, and, you know, I'm going to die because I'll get attacked. Which is really embarrassingly, I say that because my sister actually did that, and she said that. And she's fine. She's still alive, which is good. And so they overflow to these suburbs where they can afford to buy. But what attracts them there is a few things. So accessibility to transport, so whether it's the motorway or rail, and also community. And so we said to people, let's go to, when we first started buying, was we're going to take you to Glen Eden. And they said, where the hell's that? Because nobody knew where Glen Eden was. And can you swear in Singapore? I think it's okay. And so we took them to Glen Eden. Why? Because we said, well, they're going to double track the railway to New Lynn, and they're going to take the railway underneath a little bridge so they can connect with the bus. And then on from that is Glen Eden, which has got a library, it's got a theatre, it's got good schools, and we were right. And it was just a pokey little strip mall, and now you've got high-rise apartments there. And so you're looking for where people will flow to. So when we started this business back in 2007 as a buyer agent, so that's how we started, sold the accounting practice, and said, let's help people buy properties really well, because we'd seen a lot of people go out and kind of invest in crazy schemes, and it's like, this is really easy. Just buy a good property in a good area that's going to go up and put some science behind it, and it's really, really worked. And so people, and we said, but buy close to the train station, because one day that'll become really valuable. And that's exactly what's happened. And so where do you want to buy is where people, now Queenstown, yeah, we love Queenstown because a lot of people want to live there. And it's growing. And it's no longer boom bust, that's history. Queenstown's not boom bust, it's a destination, it's not a destination, it's definitely a place to live in. So that's residential. So Auckland, definitely buy in Auckland if you can afford it, but becoming unaffordable from an investment point of view. Hamilton's great. Tauranga, yes. Hawke's Bay, yes. Wellington, don't like it. I was born there, but don't like it. Christchurch, yes. Good industry. Queenstown, love it, but buy in the right area of Queenstown. Can't get caught out. What was that? Whangarei? Yeah, Whangarei's all right. Yep, we bought something up there. Yep. Oh yeah, what would you like to know? Because I could talk a long time. Like, so if you want to do residential property, the best way to do that is to use us and use our buyer agency service, and commercial property use us as well. So we've got some property syndicates. You can get 8%. So we'll talk about that later. So commercial property. So I talk a lot about residential because residential actually precedes, when the market starts going up, residential usually happens first and then commercial property follows. So commercial property yields have dropped now, so cap rates have dropped. They were going nuts pre-COVID, and they've eased. They've softened, but they're starting to firm up again. Banks hate offices. They don't mind A grade, but in New Zealand, you'll struggle to get them to bank a B grade office. They're nervous. I think that's unjustified as long as we've bought an office block in Queenstown, and we're going to do it up and progressively do it up because I think it's a fallacy about the work from home. Yes, work from home is happening, but I don't think it's the end of the office. We are seeing, so Bank of New Zealand have called, you could work from home whenever you want. They've said to people, no more, you've got to be in the office at least 3 days a week. Who else has called people back in? Haze Night recruiters have said if you don't hit your targets, then you're back in the office until you hit your targets, because it was affecting productivity. Who else? Yeah, so we have a work from work policy, which didn't go down that well. And recruiters said to us, well, you'll never hire anybody, but we don't care because we have a policy. If you really want to work, if you've got a purpose from working from home, that's okay. But we want to protect our culture, and funnily enough, we have been able to keep attracting people. Industrial is the darling of commercial property, and that's still in high demand. And retail, strip retail, we've bought a Countdown down in Canterbury at 8%, so it's, well, we paid 9% and it's out the door, return on equity of 8%. And I don't mind, I like big box, what I call big box retail, or what the industry calls big box retail. Good long leases, you know, Countdown's going to be there forever. They're not going to go anywhere. And so, but retail, it's shopping centres, shopping malls are a really specialised industry, and you're up against the Westgates in New Zealand, so you've got to do it really, really well. So commercial is great from a yield point of view, but you know, you kind of, if you buy, kind of say you want to have $3 million to spend in New Zealand to get it, because it's all about the quality of the tenant. Below $3 million, you're into ma and pa businesses that are more risky, and New Zealand's a bit weird. Elsewhere, you struggle to get longer than a 4-year lease on a smaller commercial property, whereas you get into 3-5 million, you can start to get at least 6 years, which is what you want, because commercial property is all about the quality of the lease, quality tenant, length of lease, the yield, and industrial simple. So commercial property is starting to firm up. So like, saw a real softening. Auckland is already firming, and we're seeing yields kind of starting to compress again. There's still, so what's happened is that some of you will know this, but the banking works differently, and it's all about interest rate cover ratios. And so if you're not hitting your interest cover ratios, then the banks will start having conversations with you. And if you can't put in more equity, then you've got to sell. It's a fairly straightforward, you know, stump up or get out. And so the Countdown that we bought at 9%, we looked at that 4 years earlier when it was 6%, couldn't make it work. There was a couple of traders were sort of trading it amongst each other, and then the last one standing with it got caught out, and so he lost $3 million on it. So we paid 16 mil, and he had paid 19 mil for it, and he had to sell because of those banking covenant breaches. And there's still a bit of that to flush out. So we are picking up deals still at those rates. They're hard to get, pretty much down in the regions, but I like the regions for commercial property because you do get the higher yields, but the tenants aren't necessarily any worse. So Hawke's Bay, we bought the Waddies building in Hawke's Bay, which is the size of 4 football fields, and that's you know, great. So love commercial, but you just got to have the money, and that's why our property syndicates are designed, because you want bigger is better generally with commercial property, and that's what these property syndicates offer, is the chance to access bigger properties, but not all of us can afford $30 million. Yeah.
Speaking of money and getting capital out, have you, because we're talking about the Southeast Asian region, and some countries there are people with immense wealth, but they just can't get over the capital controls of that particular country. Now, you've talked a little bit about basically financing New Zealand, but what are the sort of impacts do you see in terms of maybe developers, you know, trying to get money out from their home jurisdictions, or, you know, people coming and struggling to actually bring money into New Zealand? Is it something of a factor?
Yeah, it sort of touches on a much wider topic. So there's limits on what foreign buyers. So pretty much the only countries that can invest in New Zealand are Australia and Singapore. Yeah, so it's really unique. You guys have got, Singaporeans have got a really unique situation where they can do that. So I mean, it's quite particular to each country, and that's but I suppose, yeah, so I think it's quite unique. You know, China, you might be more informed than I on that, but China's a challenge. If that's what you're asking. So the question was, I think your question was, is it a challenge for people to get money out of their home jurisdiction to be able to invest in New Zealand? Or is that not the question?
It's sort of that, but it's more, I guess, nuanced. Like, what are the impacts on your model? Or I guess, simplifying it even further. Have you considered how that might impact on the?
On this model, yeah. Well, okay. So we had the foreign buyer ban during Labour's reign, and there was great, speculation about what would happen. And look at what it's done. Nothing. So,
To stay, basically.
yeah. Well, I mean, there are a lot of Auckland developers that did a lot of sponsorship of National Enact, and who are extremely disappointed that they didn't get what they paid for, and that they were really hoping, because National said that they would allow foreign buyers back in, and Winston Peters stood up and said, no way, I'm not having it. And so that's not happening. And so they're frustrated, but as you can see, it comes back to, does that mean that demand is now less than supply? No, it doesn't, because you've got this pent up. I mean, John Key let in hundreds or thousands more migrants into the country, and that's what sort of stimulated a lot of activity. And I don't think, I think they've got, him and John Billinger have got a lot to answer for, because I don't think that, and I was actually in a conference and said it's a small conference, and said, Bill, do you think you missed an opportunity to invest? And he said, I sort of asked it quite benignly, I didn't say it like that. And he said, do you think that we missed an opportunity? And I said, yeah, I think you did, because I do think they did. I think they underinvested in infrastructure. Anyway, I'm getting off topic, aren't I? Back to investment in New Zealand. So no, the answer is we haven't seen any evidence of that impacting. So if it did come back, I think it would just exacerbate the problem. Yeah.
Okay, I saw the recent report that there's a surge in the residential listing to 31,454 units of listing in February. So why sudden surge in that? Is it more mortgages here or what?
So you're saying that I think your question is that listings have increased? Yes.
31,000.
Yep. So we've definitely seen an increase in supply. So in terms of supply, we measure that. I haven't put that graph up. We love our graphs, but supply has been quite constrained up until February. So all of a sudden, we've seen a big increase in supply or listings, and like what they call the property press, which is the magazine that they put out, with the printed one, has gone from that to that all of a sudden. And so now a whole lot more listings. And our belief is that that is a temporary thing, because what's happened is people have said, actually, this squeeze is starting to really hurt me. These higher interest rates, I now need to sell. And so we're seeing that come on the market, and there's a bit of a glut. But what doesn't change is you step back again and saying, well, we've got this demand-supply imbalance. So it's not been soaked up by the market because there's nervousness. We came back, so we did a market commentary before Christmas and said, we think that what will happen is that as a result of the new government, that's going to increase, make people feel good. What we haven't talked about is the confidence factor. So confidence is huge, and that people will come back and we'll see the typical January spike in inquiry in our business, and that is exactly what happened. So we saw a massive spike compared to January 2003 in inquiry of people wanting to buy, use our buyer agency service and syndication. And so that took off, but then all of a sudden we got, the ANZ economists said, Sharon, somebody said, we think that interest rates are going to go up again. Interest rates are going to go up. And then another bank economist said that as well, and said the interest rates are going to go up. It's like, that's bollocks. That's not going to happen. And then John Key, chairman of the board of ANZ, said, I think she got it wrong, or he's retiring. And then she came out 2 weeks later and said, yeah, I did get it wrong. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. But what happens is that New Zealanders, so we know exactly what's going to happen to our inquiry levels by reading the paper. As soon as you hear, because it's sensationalist. So Herald runs a title about what's going to happen, and this has happened, and then so that everybody So what happens is that people come in and they talk to us and they say, thinking of buying, well, how does it work? And we have conversations. It's not a quick decision, understandably. You've got to do a plan. We do a financial plan. And then all of a sudden people will stall and go, yeah, I'm just thinking about it. I'm just want to make sure I write the decision. Okay, so you're nervous. I get that. And but that's normal. But it's the sensationalist headline stuff. And then, so we said, you've got to read something other than New Zealand Herald. Go and read, go and listen to David Skilling, who he worked for McKinsey here. I don't know if you guys know him. He's a small country economist, Kiwi, big brain, and right. You should listen to him, read his stuff. It's really good for understanding what's happening around the world. Read the AFR, read what's going on in the UK. But Kiwis in general don't do that. They get caught up with what's happening in New Zealand, forgetting that who cares what inflation is doing in New Zealand right today? Because if you look at the inflation graphs of every other major international country, they're all doing that. So inflation's going to come down. So to answer your question, I think that supply will get soaked up because it has to. It's a confidence thing. So if we start to see sort of a little bit of a trend around interest rates, we start talk about the OCR coming back, that supply I think will get soaked up really quickly. It's not that there aren't people in New Zealand that can't afford to buy those properties. There's just a confidence thing. And I think it'll just take a little bit more time for that to get soaked up.
3 months, 6 months, 9 months, your prediction? I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but...
Yeah, so what is my prediction? I was hoping somebody would ask that. So I can tell you what I think is going to happen.
We've got to pay,
Yeah.
earn your keep.
I know. Still waiting for the government to ring me to come and perform. I think, so here's it's not the view of Erskine and Owen, because not everybody in Erskine Owen has this view. I think interest rates the OCR will start coming back down towards the end of the year. I think that's highly possible. What was that?
Next year.
No, this year. You think next year? You think next year? Who thinks this year? Let's take it. Who thinks next year?
In Singapore, the DBS thought it was going to come down in March.
Yeah.
So
More
now,
important-
and it hasn't happened. So,
The more important question is how much? How
But
much will it
inflation
come
rate is
down?
not going down.
Because
Yeah.
it might come down once or twice, but if it stops,
Yep.
it's still a very high interest rate.
So here's why. Well, this is why, because this is just a theory, but you've got the fact that you need more housing. Like you've seen the problem that we've got, which is this massive. How do you fix that? We know that the country needs more housing, and we know that private landlords are the 80% of the solution for that. So we're looking at consents. I think consents are a third. So I think I think it's roughly half. Call it half. So half of your population growth you need in houses. So I think if we had 130,000, we need roughly 65,000 new houses, and we've only consented 30,000. So now we're another 30,000 houses behind. So we've got a deficit, and it's almost 7 o'clock, so we better wrap up. And so we've got a deficit. So we've got to fix that. How do we fix that? We've got to get private landlords back in the market. How do we do that? We've got to have it affordable. So how do we make it affordable? The banks have got to be able to lower interest rates. So I don't think the Reserve Bank's going to have a choice. So I think what could happen is that, although the other solution is that they just start to ease the LVR restrictions again rather than reduce rates, but I think it's going to be a combination.
What about the debt to income ratio?
It's already happening. So
That's problematic because our wages are going to start to come down because we've got large net migration,
Yeah.
which will be deflationary on that.
Yeah, so DTIs, so debt to income ratio, is not officially in New Zealand from an RBNZ. It's a prudential measure, but I think it'll come, but it's effectively already there. One last question.
Council rates, how much impact do you think this is going to be? They're talking large changes in certain areas compared to other areas. How much is that going to affect?
Don't know, yeah. Council rates, what impact will that have? I don't think, personally, I don't think majorly. It's expensive, but it's part of life, isn't it? And it affects property owners, yeah.
May I know what's the average construction cost at Christchurch per square metre?
What is it?
Construction cost.
Yeah, what is the
residential.
for residential? And it's about the same around the country, but depends on what you're building, but it's at least $4,000 a square metre, at least, but it depends on what you put in, and that's for a simple 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom double garage home. It's gone up to about 4,000. It was probably closer to 3,000 pre this inflation hike, but it's gone up. So I'm around. I'm sticking around, so keep asking questions afterwards. So what we do is, as you've heard, buyer agency. It's a great process. We're the best in the country, not because I do it, but because we've got a good team that does it. And then we do property management, we do mortgage brokering and property syndicates as well and funds. So we're one stop. I guess we're a turnkey property investment solution for New Zealand. So I'd love to talk to you about that. I'm around till Thursday night. If people want to catch up, talk about their portfolios and what they're trying to achieve, love to chat. So good to be here, and hopefully that provided some insights and can be useful for your property aspirations. Thank you guys. Thank you.